and there are fewer and fewer places you can do that sort of thing. So my perspective comes from, what is required of me and the publishing communications world and networks and systems to do that. And it's obviously not the only perspective and the only thing that's important, but this is how this sugars out for me. And what I like about those links is it lets me write about, what I like to write about in science, which I think these are all important ways to approach writing about science, are really kind of three things. Wow, this is very intriguing. This is when you come across a scientific idea or reframing of an idea that is, or even a small experiment that is, the findings and the suggestions and the implications from them are very powerful. So that's one reason. It's sort of, this is cool, this is intriguing sort of thing. Another reason, and important way to write about science, I think, is something smells funny here. As in writing about, so I've written about the pharmaceutical industry, the things that smell funny about the pharmaceutical industry. I meant to give you examples of these things. So this is intriguing, that sort of story. I had a piece in the December Atlantic, 7,200 words about a revision of the theories about genetic vulnerability, genetic roots of both bad and good behavior. So that's one example of that. Another one was about an experimental brain surgery for depression that I wrote about for the Times Magazine. Neither of those could have done a decent job in 2,000 words. So I did them at 7,200 and 5,000 words. So the smells funny sort of story, an example of that. I've written some pieces about pharma's excesses and shenanigans. And I wrote a piece in Scientific American, ran last May, I think it was, about the overextension of the PTSD diagnosis and the problems that it's causing for people who don't have PTSD as well as for those who have it. These are the kind of questions I like to ask, and I think are important to ask and to remain a part of anything that we might roughly call science journalism. And the third thing that I like to write about, and I think is important to do, and is part of the second thing in a way, is a larger sort of seismic level interplay between science and culture. How does science embody and express deep cultural forces and beliefs and trends? How does it work back the other way to color and affect the culture? And these things, they're happening all the time, and they're happening at large, long-term levels too. For me, it was very helpful. And that comes into play a little bit in the piece I wrote about, well, quite a bit in the piece, all the pieces I just mentioned, the piece about PTSD, big time, interplay of culture and science there, the piece about, all the pieces about pharma, obviously, and the piece about the roots of vulnerability for things like depression, ADHD, aggression, and how those genetic roots can also have advantages. That was the Atlantic piece. Always there's a rich interplay of culture and science, and I think that's important to have going forward. So these are the things I like to write about, and that I hope to continue writing about as this, the institutional structures and financial underpinnings that will now allow me to do these things change. There's no place I write for that I feel absolutely confident will exist and pay in the same kind of way in 5 years than it does now. I am hoping they do. I'm not counting on it that they will. Things are changing. I've had stories in the past couple of years not appear in print because the magazine that they were written for, story completed, paid for, thank God, folded before the story ran, twice. So what is required to do these long kinds of stories? Money is required. There's no way I can do these stories without taking a lot of time, talking to a lot of people, as many of them as possible in person. It just takes a lot of time. And even if I'm paid terribly, it still requires a lot of money. The other thing is a venue to present it that'll allow for 5,000 to 8,000 words. Now I got 1 minute left. I am much more optimistic about both those things than I was just a year ago. And I'll probably have different feelings in a year, hopefully even more optimistic, because I think there are already ways that are finding ways to fund this, fellowships, places like ProPublica, E360, and there are venues where you can present this. I used to be skeptical that anyone would read a 7,200 word article online. tons of people read the Atlantic article online, but the response online, and you could tell which article they read because the web had a different version title than the print version. Huge response to people who clearly read the whole thing. So I don't worry about those things so much. I'm actually roughly optimistic, even though I know it's going to be extremely challenging for individuals to find a way to make the connection, to both get the money and connect to the venue. It used to be the same thing. You got the money and the venue at the same place. You sold the story to, the New Yorker, or the Atlantic, or the New York Times Magazine. This is going to change. So as all this changes, I'm going to be really fast now. What do we have to watch out for as, assuming these things come together, being optimistic? We need to watch that the money comes from sources and in a way that is no more latent and problematic than it already is. I'll just put it that way. We have to demand transparency from the writers and from the writers about their sources and about where the writer's money comes from. And we need to demand skepticism always so that we don't end up writing up this is cool story about something that really actually smells fun. So this is what I think is important, and that's my 5 minutes. Thank you.
I just want to talk just real quickly about some of the lessons about science journalism I've learned from the sex lives of ducks. So about 2 years ago, I was at a party and I met a woman named Patricia Brennan. I said, "What do you do?" And she said, "I study duck genitals." And I said, "Really?" And it turned out that she was doing some magnificent work on these extravagant genitals that ducks have, which are driven by sexual selection, and it's Darwin in action. And she got a paper with her colleagues published in, I believe it was in PLOS. And so at the time, I went to my editor in the New York Times and said, "I'd like to write an article about this. They're actually going off to a duck farm doing a little research this week. Can I go with them?" My editor said, "Yeah, sure." And so it was so there I was writing an article for a newspaper, in a sense, a very conventional format, even though it might be a slightly unconventional subject. But I basically kind of wrote it the way you write an article, like that. I open, I set the scene, I give sort of the basic point of her research, and then go through the whole story and kind of bring it out and what kind of stuff she wants to do with it. And one of the things she wanted to do was actually be able to see, okay, I got to get into a little duck sex detail. So the penis is corkscrew shaped. The female's reproductive tract is corkscrew shaped, but the wrong way. And so she wanted to really see what was going on there. And I was like, some sort of X-ray thing. And she's like, "I got a few ideas." I was like, "Great." Okay, so recently she got in touch with me and said, "Next paper's coming out." And so, "Well, what'd you do?" "Well, we built these silicone duck vaginas and got these ducks to have sex with it, and it's everything I would have predicted about sexual selection." And I said, "Oh, interesting. What happened?" "Well, they split open the silicone vagina, and so we had to go to glass. Glass work." And I'm on the phone like, "Really?" And I'm saying, "I've got to write about this again." And she was just her paper was being published in, I think it was Proceedings of the Royal Society of London. Ed wrote about this research too. So the Royal Society of London is giving its imprimatur to this very kinky stuff. And so, and I said, a lot of scientists I've been talking to they make video part of their regular research. I said, "Patty, you didn't happen to have any video, do you?" And she sent me 2, just mind-blowing stuff. So I called up my editor again at the Times, and I'm like, "Remember that story I did on duck sex?" And he said, "Yeah." And I want to send you a couple videos. he sent me back an email while he was watching them, and I can't really say what he said, but it's all in capital letters.